Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Culture Summit. I hope you had an enjoyable evening last night and began to sample the wares of the various Edinburgh festivals. We're going to kick off this morning with a series of presentations, but we're going to start with a performance of our own. And I want to have great pleasure in introducing the director of the Aga Khan Music Initiative, Ferouz Nishanova, who will be accompanied by musicians Feraz Karestan and Basil Rajoub, who will perform a music piece. And if I could ask Ferouz to introduce the Aga Khan Initiative and her musicians.
Good morning, thank you. You know, we tend to view live music as a fitting and somewhat predictable closure, scheduled usually at the end of a hard day of cultural development work. Yet today we begin with it. So Edinburgh Culture Summit, my sincere thanks for doing away with tradition yet again so gracefully. I should probably mention that this does not necessarily represent the views of the artists who had to do a sound check and a rehearsal at 7:30 this morning. Me, however, I'm very grateful. Not only for being able to present yet another musical discovery and being back in the city of Edinburgh, but also I'm grateful for you for making my job this morning so very easy. Usually I would kick off this by launching into a glorious tale about the work of the network that I serve, which has over the last 60 years been serving many countries all over the world and providing essential services and cultural, economic, and social development. I would speak to you about our commitment, about our approach to integrated cultural development, and many other elements that make the success necessary. Yet all I have to do is introduce the masters. And even that is not necessary because their work speaks usually very eloquently for itself. Yet it is important to note the process that led us to working with and supporting such talents. You see, in the fully formed opinion of today's world, what these artists do is impossible. The perception tells us that in the lands torn by conflict and war, there is no space for art and new creations. And the artists who come from different faith and backgrounds do not converse with one another, let alone create new music and new arts in each other's honor. Yet this is what they do every single day. These artists are among the master musicians of the Aga Khan Music Initiative, a collective of venerated composer, arrangers, and performers who create new music inspired by their own deep roots and their own cultural heritage from the Middle East, Mediterranean basin, West Africa, China, and Central Asia. These masters appear on the world's most prestigious stages, linking countries and continents, and present and past. And in doing so, they contribute very strongly to the Music Initiative's mission to invigorate cultural art and intellectual pluralism in all the nations which we serve. We serve the nations of the global East, where the role of music was never relegated to the one of mere entertainment. Instead, the practice of learning music and training of young musicians were means of attaining spiritual union, preserving and transmitting beliefs, customs, and moral values. Back then and today, the abiding desire of musicians from different cultures to seek artistic common ground remains a powerful and poignant symbol of our shared humanity. Time then to bring on stage today's storytellers, Basil Rajoub and Feraz Karestan. And while they come on stage, welcome, come on. It's the Parliament. Make haste. You've seen their bios in the program brochures, so beautifully prepared by the summit, so I will not repeat anything about their lives. I will only say that in presenting their work, they illuminate one of the universe's most axiomatic rules, that the tradition in the hands of the masters is inexhaustible and serves as the inspiration for contemporary work today. In the hands of the master, that what is proclaimed impossible happens every day. Back in their role of storytellers, Basil and Feraz bring to you today 3 tales. The first one is titled Golden Waves, and it speaks of great loss, sacrifice, and black depth of pain and despair, and of the healing powers and imagination of light and sound. The second, Samai, shows that a musical form, often relegated to serve as a museum relic, can be made present and contemporary and intended for the hearts and ears of you today. Golden Waves and Samai. third musical tale of this morning is titled My Gypsy Home. A home that's kept only in one's heart remains accessible even when the country isn't. A home that is kept in one's heart can never be destroyed. In the words of the composer, we head out of our country thinking that we carry no luggage, completely unaware of the biggest gift that our homeland has bestowed upon us. That gift is a gift of musical knowledge and memory, which remains with us throughout many journeys, soothes the wounds, inspires creation, provides warmth and stability. The music we write in response is our gift to the homeland left behind, My Gypsy Home.
Firaz and Basil, thank you very much indeed for a lovely way to start our morning here in the Parliament. Thank you very much indeed. And Firaz, thank you very much for the work you do at the Aga Khan Music Initiative. Thank you. Well, after that, we're now going to move to the first of our presentations this morning, and I'm delighted to call Ong Keng Sen. Ong Keng Sen is the director of Theatre Works Singapore, which is a company drawing on all different language groups and cultures to make a transcultural theatre performance. So I'd like to invite Ong Keng Sen to make the first presentation of the morning.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Thank you to the summit, and thank you to Jonathan. It's my real privilege to be here this morning to hear the musicians, and also last night to see Akram's performance. It was really interesting to suddenly be caught by a young dancer, and out of the blue, like some blue peeping between clouds. And sometimes you think about the exuberance and that this will be the future innovator. And I'm always moved by that kind of situation. So thank you, Akram. Okay. Being born and raised in Singapore, I always felt there were other networks out there for me. I was in a missionary school, the Anglo-Chinese school. Its name already tells you its mission: to convert, hybridize, create Methodist Asians and British gentlemen in the little island of Singapore. I remember having chapel Mondays and morning prayers over the public announcement system. Then I would go back home to ancestral worship and Buddhist altars. My mother had baptized me to the Goddess of Mercy, and we were frequent visitors to the Waterloo Street Temple. She had arrived in Singapore at the age of 13, immediately after World War II. She had accompanied an elderly lady to get a free passage to Singapore, where she was searching for her brothers, my uncles, who were already setting up small businesses and trading in Singapore. She was match made to my father at the age of 19, and the rest, as they say, is history, except that my mother's networks became a part of mine in unexpected ways. I would convert from speaking English in school and converse with her in our mother tongue, a little-known dialect called Xinghua or Henghua. My mother's appetite for Mandarin cinema affected my siblings and I growing up. We saw many a sword-fighting movie produced by the Shaw Brothers Studio in Hong Kong. Her love for street Chinese opera brought me to my first theater. I wandered in this theater, watching the actors apply their thick makeup and elaborate hairpieces backstage, open for all to see. I played below the stilt stage and saw the actors fidget in the offstage wings before launching into military battles on stage. The theater of temple festivities and the performances of shamans or mediums became both terrifying and mesmerizing to me. I remember being slept by the gods through a medium. His blow to my shoulder was so strong that I burst into tears, alarming my mother that I was perhaps possessed by evil spirits. In a sense, all this was subaltern to the mainstream experience of a good English language education in the Western Singapore model. Before Shakespeare and Thomas More in A Man for All Seasons, plays which I studied at 14 years old, I was already in another culture network. People might think it's schizophrenic today to move between the New Testament and Buddhism, but there was a strong porosity in all these experiences when you are 5 to 10 years old. What I didn't realize then was that I was crossing borders very fluidly and effortlessly. My search for the other networks which I felt I belonged to brought me to traditional theaters all over Asia. I was searching for a cosmos which was outside my urban Singaporean experience. A different way of telling stories, another rigor, another body, another imagination, and of course, another worldview. I was thirsting for all the grandmothers and grandfathers that I never had. Their contexts, their contemporary life experiences fraught with the challenges of a transforming society. I tried to translate my journey over deserts in Rajasthan and mountains in Tibet to the artists that I was collaborating with. Then you realize that what is untranslatable is the lived experience of being with. Now, I'm just going to show some slides. Ben, can you bring them on? These slides are of a research and development project called the Flying Circus Project. And here you see a first slide of a Thai mask master actually beginning his training process by giving thanks to the objects that he uses, swords, masks. And it's a very interesting beginning because you realize that it's about respect. It's not about religion. And amongst the artists there were Muslims, Christians. And this is, I think, the powerful essence of the kind of work where you negotiate borders through art. And you see here the Thai dance master actually using his feet to press on the body of the young urban dancer. And it's a kind of a body-to-body transmission of these skills, which is very, very deep in traditional performances. And, and during those 4 weeks every year, the dancers or the actors will learn to play music, like learn to play the gamelan, and the musicians will learn to dance. So it's a kind of moving across to things which you don't normally do to encounter the other rather than yourself and your own contexts. And it was an interesting experience to bring Tibetan monks into a kind of a context where they totally don't belong in. And it was, of course, there's a whole question of which Tibetans to bring from China. But in the end, we went to the mountains in Kunming and brought the Tibetan monks from there. You can see them rehearsing in this very incongruous situation of a rehearsal studio, and very young monks who are actually learning this dance and using this dance to enter into their belief. And you begin to realize that deep in the heart of what we do as artists and as people, I think, is belief. Not spirituality, not religion, perhaps, but belief. And they enter into the dances in total belief. And what was really fascinating about this time was the ability for the other Asian artists in the year 2000 to converse with these young monks, why they had become monks in the first place, and their life experiences. And again, because it was open to artists from all religions, all spiritualities, we had lots of Muslims talking to the living Buddha, for example, to understand the process of Buddhism in his context. Okay. So, in the rehearsal studio, I tried to connect with this live experience of being with. To this end, in the multilingual productions that I've made, we have as many translators as actors. Sometimes rehearsals are like UN conferences, with translators bridging every spoken comment simultaneously into Bahasa Indonesia, Japanese, Mandarin, Korean. Sometimes an hour rehearsal may be followed by 3 hours of discussion and translation as artists attempt to cross the inherent borders of cultures, art forms, individual choices. These translators are the lifelines of such processes as they continue their work into informal contexts like drinking together late into the night after rehearsals. So I'm talking about the person-to-person communication that is vital in networking. At the end of social media and endless YouTube gazing is the inevitable need to ground the communication to some human connection. We become prepped to experience the world through YouTube, but this access doesn't substitute the life discovery, the encounter between the self and the other. This live research and development project that I showed some slides about took place over 18 years from 1996 to 2013. The Flying Circus Project, as it's called, began with a geographical survey of Asia, its traditional art practices brought into the rehearsal studio, and culminated with the need to be inside the local context. So the project, the Flying Circus Project, became an international nomadic residency with a caravan of artists, writers, thinkers traveling to meet the grassroots public intellectuals, activists, and journalists on the local site. Looking over the 8 editions which took place, I realized that it was a different value system, which displaced the efficient paradigm of performance indicators and cost recovery ratios. Each Flying Circus project was a handmade experience, which encouraged the individuals to encounter difference, to choose empathy, and to reflect on their personal contexts. The last edition was set in Myanmar, and the preparatory process took 3 years to tailor the project for 31 individuals hailing from Los Angeles to Johannesburg to Helsinki to Sydney. And in the meantime, Aung San Suu Kyi entered the Myanmar parliament, and the handmade process over 3 years required an investment in Myanmar curators, as well as local projects such as pop-up museums, traveling film festivals, reconciliation processes dealing with trauma and healing. The mobile international artists were balanced with an alternative University of Myanmar youths who met their grassroots public intellectuals for the first time, those who were transforming monastery education, political cartoonists, jailed journalists, digital documentary makers, and environmental activists. Directly, and often for the first time, even though they were all local to the site, they had never met before. These localized individuals resulted in a reclamation of public space by the Myanmar individuals. The international artists were in a way displaced to become backbenchers as we experienced their actions. So ethical generosity, creating nothing as there is no art production, especially when the investment is for another culture, not your own culture, requires us to set aside our cynicism and to remain enchanted with the world. Today, as my mother begins to slip into memory loss and her aging process, she's still able to recount her movie experiences fresh off the boat in Singapore. She tells vividly about her going to cinemas that have long been demolished. She tells of Chinese New Year's Eve, rushing after cooking a large reunion dinner to watch 2 movies for the price of $1 in 1950. I have lost my ability to deeply communicate with her in dialect. I'm unable to tell her about my personal experiences in theater, in the art form that she kindled in me, or in the cultural process in Myanmar that I just told you. She remains like my tailbone in my body, vestigial, and yet very present. When I rest hard suddenly on this tailbone, I'm reminded that I once came from somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, Aung Kyen Sen. And we now move on to Wesley Enoch, and Wesley is the director of the Sydney Festival. Wesley will be talking about how he discovered his own culture and sense of identity through theatre. Wesley Enoch.
Garing in name, Jojo Mumarongo, Garing in name, Garing in name, Jojo Mumarongo, Garing in name, Jojo Mumarongo, Garing in name, Jojo Mumarongo, I am a maranga. I am a maranga, jagungun marungo, garin in nami, jojo mumarungo. Ay. That's a welcome song from where I come from. And it speaks of an old, no need. And it speaks of an old man sitting, waving his hand. It's both a welcome and a farewell, and it's very customary for Aboriginal people to pay respects to elders and the traditional owners of a land when we're meeting, and to pay our respects. So I pay my respects to our hosts here and also the organisers of this fantastic forum. Garin Nami is a great example for me of what I wish to add to the discussion today, the idea of cultural practice and continuity, and through this adaptation and change. I should start by saying my father, actually I have a great-great-grandfather named Fernando Gonzalez from the Philippines. I have another great-great-grandfather named Fadhiaki from Rotomar Island in the South Pacific. I have a number of different Aboriginal clans. I have a Danish great-grandmother and a Spanish great-grandfather who met on a boat coming out to Australia after World War I. I am a mix of all these things, but today I talk about my Aboriginal heritage and where I come from there. Because there's proven material evidence of over 60,000 years of cultural occupation of the continent of Australia. Aboriginal Australians are considered amongst the oldest continuous living cultures in the world, which is incredibly hard to believe when you think of the recent history of dispossession and extermination and disease and legislative denial and other byproducts of the great European colonial project. In 1835, almost 50 years after the start of British rule in Australia, the continent was declared terra nullius by the Governor of the time of New South Wales, General Sir Richard Bourke, hence proclaiming that Aboriginal people and their continual occupancy of the lands and waters did not exist. There were three options, one being that the lands were ceded territories through conquest, number two, that they were negotiated occupation through treaty, or number three, that, and this was the preferred route, that Aboriginal people did not exist there at all. This proclamation has then precipitated a lack of a whole range of things. Constitutional recognition for Aboriginal peoples in Australia. In 1901, when we became a country, couldn't recognise a people that didn't exist. And the fact that Aboriginal Australians were not freely counted on the census until 1967. Before then, we were governed under certain laws under the Flora and Fauna Acts of different states. We had to face official policies of removing children, forbidden to speak languages and dances and hunt, and had to survive on government rations. In most cases, couldn't vote, and of course couldn't enter into formal legal structures like land purchase or marriage or registration, let alone any kind of treaty. It wasn't until 1993, 25 years this year, that the legal fiction of terra nullius was formally overturned. I say this not as a guilt trip or an apportion of blame, but to highlight the resilience of a culture that through 230 years of this denial has been able to deliver to me and my family down through the ages a timeless song about an old man welcoming in a stranger. That through a continuity of language, of song and dance, I have access to millennia of culture. And though thoroughly modern in my lifestyle, with access to, modern technologies and international mobility and a plethora of socio-political philosophy, I see connections and continuity where others often see contradictions. There are over 500 different languages documented on the continent of Australia, many of which are in various states of disrepair. Many Aboriginal languages have a limited use of adjectives, and the lesson I was learnt that we had to rely on complex metaphors to make meanings, like many languages. Binang is the name for ear, but is also the name we use for listening. It is a thing, it is an object. Or you are binangunj, your ear is full of dirt, so that you are no longer listening. In the same way, if you're a woman and that woman is tall, that woman is a tree. The more understanding you have of the environment around you, the more networked you are into Mother Nature, the more complex and more expression you can give to your language. Deep knowledge of landscape provides meaning in the world. My cousin named his child Kajal, which means in our language, the first spring leaf. He gave him this name as a way of connecting to that time of year in spring, September for us, and in the trees, and building for my young cousin this connection to the world, an investment. Unlike Kajal, I am Wesley James Enoch. Wesley after the Methodist ministers, James after the apostle, and Enoch comes from Genesis 26 and given to my family by missionaries. I think they knew what they wanted me to connect to then. Our need to protect the environment is symbiotic to our need to communicate. Destroy the natural world, you destroy the complexity of interaction. Have no knowledge of landscape, you are destined to only speak like a child. There is a network of interdependence. And so it is with song and dance. And you tell the story of a landscape as a way of networking the experience of the people living in it. This is age-old and continuing, and many of you will know this. But it is a constant negotiation and evolution between the storyteller and the story listener. We often think of the term traditional as antithetical to contemporary, but this is not the case. Traditional being a practice that is mostly intergenerationally passed down, and contemporary meaning a time frame or of the present day. Thus, you can easily have a contemporary tradition or a tradition that manifests itself in the modern era. Tradition lives all around us, and it is anachronistic to believe that modernity extinguishes what has gone before. I worked on a theatre show of The Tempest where Ariel, Caliban, and the spirits of the island were played by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The premise being that in 1611, Shakespeare was writing about the wild shipwrecks and the magical otherness of the new colonies. As part of the mask scene in Act 4, Scene 1, Prospero commands Ariel to summon spirits to celebrate the engagement of Ferdinand and Miranda. In our production, a group of Aboriginal dancers came and raised the spirits in a ceremonial dance that prepared the space for a series of dances to occur. These dances get interrupted by Prospero when he starts suddenly, as Shakespeare writes, and dismisses the spirits. What followed was a complex set of negotiations where the dancers understood the theatrical language and the character of Prospero and his motivations, but were concerned because they had raised the spirits and they needed to do another dance to place the spirits back in the ground. This was a huge issue, for if left unchecked, it would endanger the audience and those on the stage if the spirits were not dealt with correctly. It was decided that the dancers would have to complete the ritual and at the end of the performance would stand on the side of the stage and sing the completion song, so the audience did not inadvertently take the spirits with them as they left. This morphed into a practice of returning to the dressing rooms where they would see the stage and the departing audience on the television monitors, and it was there that they would sing their final song. When the musical director heard this, he suggested he could mic them so that the song could be heard in the auditorium as the audience departed. And in the end, the dance group negotiated with their elders that they could be recorded and play through the speakers in the auditorium, triggered by the stage manager, and they could shower and proceed home. That song was Garrid in an Army, both a welcome and a farewell song. For me, this illustrates the continuum of culture. A cultural practice is seen to evolve through the use of technologies and manifest itself in both a theatrically interesting and culturally appropriate way, using technologies not through the denial of the past, but the acceptance of our future. Ancient cultures are adaptive and dynamic. A static museum sense of ancient cultures disempowers the modern practitioners and disallows the connection to landscape. I believe in our increasingly networked world, we must understand our environment better, protect and evolve the language of place, and actively practice the negotiation with modernity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wesley. And I'd now like to invite Sohair Khan, who is the lead on the Google Arts and Culture projects from the Google Cultural Institute. Sohair.
Thank you. So, I can't sing, but thank you all for having me here. And I'm actually going to be showing you a presentation today. So, let me preface by saying, as Wesley mentioned, technology now is important, it is immersive, it's part of all of our lives, but nothing is going to replace the experience of listening to Basil and Faraz here today or going to one of Akram's performances. And I think that as you go through this with me, I hope you keep in mind the idea that we think of technology as something that is augmentative and that allows for access and culture, but will never replace the experience of seeing something or feeling it in real life. So to start off, how many people here have heard of Google Arts and Culture? Okay, fair amount. So just to give you a quick background, the platform was founded in 2011 by a bunch of people at Google who wanted to do a side project. We call them 20% projects. So you spend 20% of your time doing something you're interested in or you think is important. And they felt that there wasn't enough cultural content or information on the arts online. At the time, whatever you found in terms of artworks was very low resolution. There were watermarks on paintings. It was before everyone had selfies. And so they set about looking to create a digitally immersive, interactive platform which allowed to share cultural content online. And we launched it with 17 of the world's art museums, from the Met, the MoMA, the National Gallery, the Prado. And I'm going to actually show you now a video to give you a little bit of a sense of what was envisaged and what was eventually built. And then I'm going to go quite quickly through the presentation, but I welcome you to come to me afterwards to ask me any questions.
Inspiration is spread around the globe, across space and time, in the places we love and with the people of our past. Art has changed the way we see the world and the way we see each other. We started with simple tools for food and fire, and then carved statues of myths and heroes. And we built monuments to last forever. There is so much to see, learn, and experience. With the Google Arts and Culture app, you can immerse yourself in 360-degree views using Google Cardboard. Or zoom in to reveal the secrets of a masterpiece. Discover inspirational moments, iconic people, and artistic wonders. Search by time or even color. Save your favorites and share them with the world. Explore more with Google Arts and Culture. Download the app and get inspired every day. Where will you start?
So download the app if you haven't already. And I'm going to talk you now through how we do this. I'm going to do some live demos of the platform. And so bear with me if things don't work. What is a platform? There's very tiny text on here, but we are an online platform accessible on your computer, on a tablet, on your mobile phone, and we now work with about 2,000, almost 2,000 institutions in over 70 countries around the world. There are about 7 million artifacts on the platform now. Each of those is individually selected, uploaded by the cultural institution. We only work with not-for-profit institutions, and we ourselves don't monetize this platform. The goal is to provide access to all of these institutions to share their artworks in a way that gives them access to a global audience. And as you can see, it's tiny numbers, but we are at Google and we care about data, and we're constantly looking to push how much we can expand the scope of these collections. We translate the content into multiple languages, and we look to using different avenues and different platforms at Google to bring this content to people around the world. We also have integrated this now into Google Search. So if an institution wishes, they can have their content featured directly on search. So what do I mean by this? I'll do a quick demo. This is google.com, and I've typed in Starry Night. What you see on the right is the knowledge panel, and if I click on this, this is actually the Google Arts and Culture platform, and that is Vincent van Gogh's artwork, which is actually owned by the MoMA in New York. You can look at it online. It's the highest resolution image of this artwork available anywhere. And you can zoom in, you can see the brushstrokes, you can see the fact that he did not prepare his canvas before painting. And then you can actually look at the entire description of the artwork from the MoMA, from the curator who takes care of this artwork, and he is basically being able to own the content that is now available online for any user that searches for it. So, as I mentioned, we're now working around the world, and we're constantly growing. We're looking to expand access. We don't say no to anybody. You could be from any country, and we would be open to working with you, to bringing our technologies and to bringing our teams to come in and to support an institution. We started off as the art project, so we thought, okay, art is culture. Let's provide a platform where we can digitize content, artworks, provide high-resolution imagery. We captured street view content, so you can walk down the halls of the Met in New York, whether you're sitting in Edinburgh or Delhi. But we realized over time that culture, as we know here today, is far broader. And so we've expanded the scope of what we cover on this platform. We looked at historical archives when we launched with the Nelson Mandela archives, and since then we've expanded on that content. We now do digitization of entire archives around the world. We've looked at the performing arts, where we launched our first virtual reality content with organizations like the Royal Shakespeare Company. We've looked at natural history, which I'll talk about a bit later, where we worked with 65 natural history museums around the world. Contemporary art. We've done a lot in Japan with intangible heritage and culture, and really look to showcasing stories around things that might not be so easily documented and might not be so easily told, but we've looked to do it in a digital format. We just launched a project on Korean heritage, also in May this year. So there's a lot there that we're looking at in terms of what's not in a museum necessarily, but how can we bring that to new audiences? And most recently, we've launched preservation, which I'm going to show you now. This is very dear to us, and I'll show you a quick video. But it is a story of our working with curators and archaeologists around the world now to think about sites or cultures that are at risk. I was recently in Lucknow in India, which is a city in the north of the country, and it's beautiful. It's known for poetry and history and literature. There's amazing architecture from the British Raj and from the Mughal era, and a lot of it is crumbling away with population growth, with new buildings coming up. And part of what we're doing is thinking about places like that and cultures like that and thinking about how technology cannot replace them or recreate them, but can perhaps help to preserve them, to showcase them, and to at least represent those stories to institutions or to people around the world. So this project, we worked with an organization called SciArc, and we documented 25 sites from 18 countries around the world. They range from the Al-Azam Palace in Damascus to Bagan in Myanmar, which I'll talk a bit after you see this. And we use technologies such as laser scanning, 3D printing, augmented reality, street view captures, drone view imagery captures, high-resolution photography to look at these sites around the world, to bring them online, but also to make them accessible and hopefully also enjoyable for people to explore, whether you're on your phone or on your computer. So watch the video. So I hope you'll look at it online. A couple of things about this. So Bagan in Myanmar was actually destroyed by an earthquake in 2016, and this imagery was captured before the earthquake. That was obviously just fortuitous. So it is now actually the only place you can see these temples. You can go inside, you can look around them. It is amazing, and you wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. And secondly, it is actually now all open source online, all of the data and all of the imagery. So although we've created augmented reality experience for some of the sites, we've had developers coming up and downloading some of the imagery and creating their own AR experiences on their smartphones using the new API. So there is a lot of possibility for making this a collective experience for people in different countries. I'm going to very quickly show you this to give you a sense of a very different type of project that we did. This is on fashion. We worked with about 200 institutions around the world to tell the stories of fashion as heritage. This was 40 countries. We have about 30,000 artifacts documenting the history of fashion as heritage around the world, and it was called We Wear Culture because of that. We had tons of virtual reality films, street view captures. I'll show you the video, and then I'll show you the platform very quickly. It's a very different vibe, and this is actually what the website looks like. It was called We Wear Culture. These are all of the institutions that we work with. And you just scroll down. It's like any website. You can explore the various artifacts. You can look at chapters. This is cool. It's a color palette of fashion. So this is all 30,000 artifacts, and it's just simple machine learning. And you can look at them by color. So you could have a very sort of fun experience exploring. What is that? That's the Art Deco Museum in Paris. So you can actually just go through it and have a fun experience exploring. It's set up in chapters, so you can look here. This is the icons, and it's the first time you'll see organizations like the Met sitting next to the Balenciaga Museum. There's the Fondazione Pitti, and they're all sitting together around thematic areas. So we're thinking of this as it is a global exhibition, and it's bringing together institutions in unique ways, and it has been quite fun for curators at these institutions to think about how their collections and their stories can be showcased in different ways. So again, I encourage you, if you can, to go online and to take a look. This is a natural history project, which I will not show you, but take a look at it. We recently did a physical installation at the National Gallery in London around their Monet exhibition, where we looked at the idea of Monet and his inspiration with place, and we used Google Earth to do that. It is also online, so you can see it on your phones, but the idea is let's go in real life or in real time to what a place looks like today and think about how Monet saw it and how he came up with that artwork. So that one, the Thames below Westminster, we found a street view capture from someone on a boat in the middle of the Thames. So that is somehow how Monet had placed himself when he was looking at it. So it's a fun experience. So what do? We digitize, we provide high-resolution photography, we capture with Street View, we think about how to push, how you can bring your collection online, we do archive documentation, we provide a platform for institutions to share their work. Again, they own it, and they tell the stories around it, and it is on multiple platforms. This is an example, which I was not going to show you, but I'll show you because it is quite cool. This is St. Paul's Cathedral. How many people here have been there? Okay, so the ceiling is about 85 meters from the ground. So to give you an example of the photography that we do, if you zoom in, looking at this, I mean, you can be an artist, you can be whatever, but it gives you a very different sense. These are the mosaics that have been used, and you zoom out and you see that you would need to be sort of standing next to the ceiling to see that in real life. So that is an example of the technologies that we provide. That's the Street View tracker. You see the little one there. That's designed just for museums. It has lots of breaks, and it's very narrow, so curators don't get worried. And that's the CMS, which you can look at. And then, of course, we have a lab. This is in Paris. Everybody, let me know if you'd like to come. Send me an email. You're welcome to come in to visit. This is where we think about collaborations between art and technology in a more experimental way. We have a team of coders who are constantly working on things like machine learning. We're now thinking a lot of, obviously, about augmented reality. We have artist residencies, and we're working on experimental projects all of the time. This is where we think about things that might not necessarily make it to the platform. An example of a collaboration we recently did was with Paul Smith. He loves color. And so we've actually built into the platform a new feature called Art Palette, where you can take a photo of a flower or an ice cream cone or your dress, upload it to the app, and it will pull up, out of the 7 million paintings on the platform, it will pull up all of the artworks that match that color palette. And then you can do what you want with it. You can design something, you can be inspired, you can think about your next graphic design output, whatever it is. So we're thinking about ways of playing with these technologies to possibly make them useful to creative people as well. So check it out, it's on the app. And then I'm gonna end with this, Google Cardboard. How many people have seen a Google Cardboard? Okay. So a Google Cardboard is a VR viewer for virtual reality. It's made of cardboard. It costs about £5, so it's very accessible. And it was invented by Damien, who sits in our lab in Paris. He's our chief innovator, but he's our chief tech innovator. But he was eating pizza one night, and he actually took a box of pizza and invented the Google Cardboard, which is now used by schools and students all over the world and by different people to, you slot in your smartphone and you can have a VR experience from the comfort of your home. We've thought a lot about the applications of this, and one of the biggest applications which has come out is education. And we launched Google Expeditions a few years ago with the idea of bringing immersive experiences of cultural sites and places around the world to students who, in many cases, will not make that field trip, to India or to Australia or to Edinburgh. So I'll show you this final video.
You could pick anywhere in the world that you want to go. Where would you want to go?
I would like to go to the moon.
Thailand, ancient Greece,
India.
To Nigeria, my homeland.
One or maybe all of the 7 wonders of the world. When you explore different places, you have the chance to actually learn something new.
You want to be able to show the kids that there's something outside of your community that you could go to and learn from, and that there's other places you can visit.
All right, so let's do our objective and we'll talk about the lesson for today.
We're gonna take a field trip to Verona, Italy to see the place where Romeo and Juliet lived.
I'm going to take you on this field trip under the water. Okay, you guys ready? Pick up your devices.
And look in your cardboard.
What is that?
I see a shark.
It allowed us to go somewhere we wouldn't normally be able to go.
Are we in China?
This is the Great Wall of China.
We got to see the place itself so we could actually understand what she was talking about.
How long would it take to walk the length of the Great Wall of China? So much more enriching than just showing them a picture or just having them read about it.
This device can actually make us go to places that we've never been before.
It brings the lesson to you.
You have to see it for yourself to believe it.
There's so much other places to see, so you know that it's never going to end.
Okay, well, I've gone way over time, so thank you very much, and feel free to come to me later if you have questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Suhair. And we are indeed a little bit behind time, but I'm delighted to call on our next guest. I think most, if not all of us, had the delight of seeing the performance of Karimati in the forecourt of Holyrood Palace last night, and it was absolutely a delight for all of us. I'm also delighted to welcome today Akram Khan, the designer of that performance, who's going to be in conversation with Sir Jonathan Mills. Akram Khan and Jonathan Mills.
Choreography here. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Very good. We're on. I'm standing still here. Akram's slouching because he has the most perfect posture and I don't. Akram's had quite a week. He was in a monumental performance at the Festival Theatre, and he had, and we all saw, the opportunity to work with how many young dancers from around Edinburgh?
About 270.
270 young dancers around Edinburgh last night. Yeah. So we're going to talk about some of the things that Akram cares about in terms of a networked world, because he hasn't had much time to think about it outside of the dance studio and outside of the performance. So this is a conversation that starts, does it not, with a taxi ride in Sydney. Tell us about that.
First of all, I want to apologize to anybody who's heard the story, particularly to my marketing and press officer who's heard the story a million times.
But I haven't heard it.
But you haven't, and
well, I'm sure none of you will have heard it.
And I also want to thank you and all of you for inviting me here to speak. The taxi story, well, I was at the Sydney Opera House performing. It was the 4th show. I had 5 shows, the 4th show. And it was a performance I was doing with Juliette Binoche. And I was on my way back to the hotel. I could see the hotel, and I decided to take a taxi for some reason. I didn't want to walk it.
Because you were exhausted.
Yeah.
Funny that.
And I decided to take a taxi. I was waiting for the taxi arrived, I opened the door, and this rude couple behind me assumed I opened the taxi for them, the door. And they got in, And they rolled down the window. The taxi wouldn't move. They rolled down the window eventually and said, "Are you Akram?" I said, "Maybe." They said, "Were you in the performance at the opera house?" I said, "I'm not sure." I was a bit peeved off. Anyway, they took my taxi, and then they realized it was me, and they said, "Thank you so much for the show," rolled up the window and left. The second taxi arrived 5 minutes later, and I opened the door, and it was the first time in my life that I needed to hear my father's voice. I don't really have a phone relationship with my father. It's mostly with my mother. My father doesn't know, or I don't quite know what to say to each other. It's that kind of relationship, on the phone anyway. But I needed to hear his voice, so I called him. I didn't know what time it was in London. And I think I woke him up, because he was...
It would have been very late.
Yeah.
Or very early.
Very early. And I said, "Abba, are you all right?" He goes, "What do you want?" So I assumed I woke him up, or maybe that's just his personality. And I said, "Nothing, I just..." and I didn't know what to ask him. And he said, "Are you in trouble with the police?" I said, "No, Abba, everything's fine. I have a question for you, but I'm not sure what it is." And he said, "Do you need money?" I said, "Abba, I'm 30, whatever. You know what? Don't worry about it. I'm sorry I woke you up." And he put the phone down, I put the phone down. And I spoke to him in Bengali. And then the taxi driver turned around and asked, "Is your father's name Musharraf Hussain Khan?" in Bengali. And I was wondering, did I mention my father's name while I was speaking to him? Of course I didn't, because in our culture we don't say our parents' name directly to them. It's very disrespectful. So I was like, "Oh, that's a lucky guess, very lucky guess." And I said, "Yes, it is." I was quite positive then. And then he said, "Can you answer me one more question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Is your father from Algijar?" Algijar is a small village in Bangladesh. I'm guessing there are 200 people in the world that know that place. 195 of those people still live there. The other 5 are my mother, my father, myself, my sister, and I presume this taxi driver. So I'm getting tense now, because it's very specific information. And it kind of freaked me out. I was thinking, I'm in Australia, I'm not in America. Why CIA? Maybe FBI? I started getting paranoid.
We have ASIO.
We have, yeah. And I said, "Stop the car." I said, "Stop the taxi." And he eventually stopped the taxi, and I was getting out. And he said, "Please, just tell me, just tell me, is he from Algijar?" And I needed to know how he knew. So I said, "Yes, he's from Algijar." "How do you know this?" He says, "I've been looking for your father for 35 years. He was a childhood friend of mine in this village. Your father had big dreams, and he wanted to do accountancy, and he wanted to open a restaurant. He loved his working with hands and cooking. And so both of us couldn't live our dreams, so I saved a bit of money, and I gave it to him, and I said, 'Go live your dreams.' So he went to Dhaka, the capital, got a degree, eventually immigrated to London. I was born there. He opened a restaurant. Many years later, this friend, this childhood friend, is seeing my father's name pop up and his stories, because of me, in the newspapers in Bangladesh. And I said, "This is unbelievable." So I called my father, and I said, "My father has to speak to you." So I called him up, and he said, "What do you want?" I said, "There's a man who needs to speak to you." And he says, "Who is he?" And I said, "Oh, how would my father know you as?" He said, "Say Billu Bhai." Bhai is brother. Billu is my nickname. Only he would know that, because he used to call me that. So I said, "It's Billu Bhai." And there was silence. And it was the first time I heard my father cry. And I went back a year later to Sydney Opera House, and I invited my parents to come. And within that year, I was trying to find all the logical, technological reasons of why that connection was made. How did that happen? What are the chances of that happening? And my parents were in the audience. He was in the audience. I stopped the show in the middle of the performance, and I told this story. And a couple, after the show, came to me. It wasn't the same rude couple. It was another couple. Came to me and said, asked me, "Did you know that couple that got in their first taxi?" I said, no. I think they were the audience members, and they just thought I'd opened the door for them. And I said, well, maybe they were your angels, because if they hadn't got in the first taxi, you would never have got in the second one.
It's quite a story. Akram, it's also, in a sense, the story of your own life, in the deepest sense, but it's a story that I would like you to take a step further and ask you another question. Born in London, but of a background that you've just described from this very specific village that your father grew up in and your mother in Bangladesh. When I see your dance pieces, and we brought Akram not just with Xenos this year to the festival, but in 2014 with a wonderful piece called Gnosis. And I'm sure many people in this room know your work because you are quite ubiquitous, you travel widely. But it strikes me that you have found, I mean, Xenos alone is a great example of what I think is the arc of your own knowledge and experience. It starts with traditional classical Indian music, and it ends with a rendition of the Mozart Requiem. So what could be more about a bridge between the place of your heritage and the place of your birth? Could you say something about that in the way that you approach dance?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very kind of interesting environment because it was very confused. I think the people around, my parents were very confused. My father is a Bangladeshi man who owned a restaurant, who wanted to actually be an actor, but he loved cooking at the same time. So the chef direction came in his way. My mother was a literature expert. So she told me stories from Greek mythology to Indian mythology to Islamic stories, many religious stories. So I grew up with that, but my mother was also working at the factory when she first moved to London, and she was working in Decca, the record company. And so on one side, above the restaurant where I lived, my father would be playing Bollywood films, and my mother would be playing the records that she got from the Decca record company that were scratched. And there were Tom Jones and Cliff Richard. I think it was Tom Jones mostly. I think she was a big fan of Tom Jones. And so I had this kind of chaos of Bollywood versus Tom Jones.
I can't quite detect that in the way you dance, but I will believe you. I'm sure we all will.
Well, for me, the body is a museum. It absorbs everything. This is the most profound museum because it's also adapting with time. It's changing. It's transforming every second. So I grew up with that, but I also grew up with watching Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson had a huge influence on me. Fred Astaire, Charlie Chaplin, Bruce Lee, Muhammad Ali. These were my superheroes, but these were my food that my body soaked in, these cultures, but also classical Indian dance. Because I think my mother and father got nervous because I was tending to move towards more Charlie Chaplin and Michael Jackson, and they wanted me to do something a little bit closer to home, so they put me into Indian classical dance. And then I went to contemporary dance many years later. Actually, I went through Mahabharat, Peter Brook's theatre. I was very lucky to work with Peter Brook at the age of 13, and that was really a very important moment of my life because that shaped my thinking of today. He did. And then many years later, I went to university because I was running away from my community that wanted me to become a mathematician because my mother's father was a genius mathematician. He was 2 times gold medalist. And they assumed that if my mother was into literature, maybe her son would be a genius math. So I grew up thinking I was a genius mathematician for many years because it's the power of belief. And people believed that I was a genius, my community, until I failed. I think 3 times I got U, which is unclassifiable, or unclassified, 3 times to convince my community that I was not a maths genius. But what was interesting was by default, I became fascinated, because I believed I was so mathematically in tune, I became fascinated by patterns, patterns of movement, patterns of behavior. So by believing I was a mathematician, something else came out of that. And that deviation was very interesting. And in a sense, I also didn't want to continue with university with anything that had to be behind a desk. So I applied to a university that somehow accepted me. I lied my way in, actually.
So why don't we do just one thing to conclude? Okay. Why don't we get you out of behind that desk?
Oh. Yeah.
And show us one of your patterns.
No. If you show me yours, I'll show you. No.
I've got no pattern.
No. Yeah. I'm not warmed up.
Anyway, Akram, thank you for all the work you've done at this festival. Thank you for sharing these very personal stories with us. And I think there's no better example of the networked world we live in than that taxi ride from the Sydney Opera House to your hotel in 2009. We salute you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Akram and Jonathan there. That was utterly fascinating. I'm now conscious we would like to move on to our first of our ministerial responses. And I'd like to invite, from Indonesia, the Director General of Culture, Dr. Hilmar Farid Setiadi. Dr. Setiadi, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Let me start with the speakers yesterday who have eloquently explained how the seismic power of technology, concentration on one hand and distribution on the other, changes institutions by turning them apart and forcing them to redefine their existence and position. This creative destruction costs a lot in economic, social, and political terms, and in some contexts resulted in upheavals. It challenges social and political orders across nations and forces us to rethink fundamental ideas of humanity and society that we have taken for granted. Connection is about building bridges and channels, and we have heard about how digital technology facilitates that. But the question is, do these opportunities to connect through digital technology immediately translate into the formation of bonds? In fact, we see more and more how we are reduced as individual users in this network world. We have become individualized without truly becoming individuals, in the words of Zygmunt Bauman, a renowned sociologist of modernity. So the question then is how to realize these potentials of connecting into meaningful connections. Different qualities are needed here: innovation, creativity, but more importantly, as discussed by Ong Keng Sen in his presentation, is the will to connect. Arts and culture is certainly instrumental in encouraging the will to connect. I come from Indonesia, a mega diverse country, where connecting is almost a given condition. With 17,000 islands, no less than 600 languages, and more than 1,000 ethnic groups, with influences from different parts of the world throughout the last 2 millennia, it is truly an intersection of cultures. Cultural policy in Indonesia from the beginning has always been about how do we manage this enormous diversity. For decades, the approach was one of protectionism, to preserve cultural heritage and cultural values, to support the arts, and so on. In the past, it was centralized, which had huge costs, financial, social, and political. The new approach now is one of advancement, where cultural preservation is directly linked to development, innovation, creativity, and the ethos is one of sharing, collaboration, and cooperation. Here, I'd like to share a new initiative that we have started in Indonesia, which directly speaks to the wonderful panel that we have heard earlier today. It is an attempt to strengthen the connections between communities in the spirit of advancing culture. It is spread in more than 60 cities, and it is growing. So while before we focused more on promoting traditional cultural expressions separated from contemporary practices. On this platform, we encourage the connections between the two. While before cultural festivals have been about celebrating, on this platform we encourage people to address contemporary issues as well, like fear, anxiety, pain. And the idea is not one of celebrating diversity only, but also to find avenues through which we would be able to transform the diverse experiences and feelings into practices of solidarity, respect, and peace, which would result in a strong will and need to connect. New but rooted at the same time. It is still too early to say where this is going, but there is an interesting quote that I take from the Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe that came to mind when I heard the beautiful performance from Feras Charestan and Basil Rajub. Reflecting on jazz, Chinua Achebe said, I quote, "But in any case, did not the black people in America, deprived of their own musical instruments, take the trumpet and the trombone," and we could add oboe here, "and blow them as they had never been blown before, as indeed they were not designed to be blown? And the result, was it not jazz? Is anyone going to say that this was a loss to the world, or that those first Negro slaves who began to play around with the discarded instrument of their masters should have played waltzes and foxtrots? No. Let every people bring their gifts to the great festival of the world's cultural harvest, and mankind will be all richer for the variety and distinctiveness of the offerings." So this is what I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity and also the invitation to participate in this excellent summit. Yesterday, I actually looked into the archive, and Indonesia was actually presented 60 years ago at the Edinburgh Festival. And this is, my presence here is also to reflect our continuous support to this great effort, and consider this also an invitation to come to Indonesia and to participate in that platform Indonesiana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Setiade, and we're delighted that you have joined us at the Culture Summit as well as at the festival. I should just mention to everyone that there's quite a discussion going on online, and if you wish to follow it, it's at the hashtag #EdCultureSummit. I think the dominant question or theme is how do we feel, and the speakers may wish to address this, how do speakers feel about the impact of digital technology on the arts? Can I call our next speaker from Nigeria, Ms. Grace Gepke, Permanent Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the presiding officer and delegates to this summit. Actually, I first of all apologize on behalf of the minister for his inability to be here. He was actually ready to come, but he was now given an assignment, official assignment. That's why he is not here. And he has asked me to just step into his shoes for a few minutes as I make this intervention as approved by him, right now. The strength of Nigeria is its cultural diversity. I'm actually making this presentation on our own perspective, Nigerian perspective. We are diverse in terms of language. We have over 500 languages in Nigeria. We are diverse in music, arts, belief, religion. Religion, we have Christianity, Islam, and traditional religion. Drama, paintings, cuisine, architecture, crafts, fashion. In every aspect of our life, we are diverse. In order to galvanize the creative ingenuity of our people, bonds of friendship, insight, and goodwill are shared at different manifestations of our unique cultural heritage. The Federal Ministry of Information and Culture, which I superintend, is mandated to protect, preserve, and promote Nigerians' culture, as well as encourage development of technology and scientific studies in all spheres of our cultural life. Nigeria reaches our diverse communities and also addresses significant disparities in the level of arts, cultural opportunities and engagements available to different communities through the 36 states of the Federation plus Federal Capital Territory, 774 local government areas, ministries, departments, and agencies. The private sector, faith-based organizations like churches and mosques, traditional institutions, 138 civil society organizations, cultural stakeholders, social media functional websites, and international partners. The best practices in improving attendance and accessibility for both members of the public and performance at cultural events include provision of enabling environment for cultural activities to thrive, provision of standard performance space, provision of adequate infrastructure and logistics, awareness creation through the media, various media platforms, the use of international standard setting instruments on culture, e.g., example, bilateral and multilateral agreements, effective collaboration with development partners, especially in our country, we partner with British Council to do a lot of things. Effective, equitable, and fair sharing of national assets and resources in Nigeria is achieved through the 3 tiers of government, federal, state, and local government areas, as well as strict adherence to the federal character principles. Nigeria maximizes the value of technology and digital space to provide opportunities to citizens to experience and benefit from cultural and creative activities through the recent switchover to digital broadcasting, provision of adequate internet facilities, and enhancing the use and penetration of active 144 million mobile lines in Nigeria, establishment of state-of-the-art public and private media organizations, seminars, workshops, and summits like what we are attending today. Nigeria protects and creates pathways for more artistic voices to collaborate in production of cultural expression by providing necessary platform for the 774 local governments to showcase their diverse cultural heritage through festivals, carnivals, exhibitions, community theaters, capacity building and skills acquisition, cultural education and exchanges, live theater, music shows, cultural NGOs and guilds, financial intervention to cultural practitioners. Some years back, 3 billion naira intervention fund was made available for the Nollywood industry, which is our movie industry. Technical and professional support to stakeholders. The challenges, in spite of all this, we have some challenges. The challenges actually facing policymakers in the foregoing areas include inadequate training and capacity building. Yes, we've been doing a lot of training, but we still need more for our stakeholders. Insufficient political will, inadequate up-to-date equipment, inadequate funds, poor remuneration and welfare packages for our stakeholders. However, inspiration in terms of transferable best practices can be drawn from living human treasures, the film industry, the music industry, publications, media, digital technology, development partners, Institute for Cultural Orientation. We have an institute that oriented our people on the cultural matters in Nigeria. We can learn from best policy and practice to build a robust cultural sector by domestication of our international standard setting instruments on culture such as the UNESCO conventions, the Charter on African Cultural Renaissance, as well as collaboration with, I've mentioned that before, British Council and other development partners. Organization and participation in local and international seminars, workshops, exchange of cultural workers and stakeholders, research and documentation. And finally, reciprocal participation in local and international cultural events. Thank you for your attention, and God bless you.
Deaconess Gekpe, thank you very much for that contribution. And I'm afraid we've only got time for one more contribution this morning from the Republic of Lithuania, the Minister of Culture, Liana Ruokit-Johnson.
No.
Oh, you're not expecting that?
something wrong. So
You're not expecting to be called. Well, the good news for me is that I'm well behind time, so that's one of the best pieces of news. In the afternoon. Well, we look forward to that in anticipation. We've got a big build-up now. So I was congratulating myself last night on how well we'd all kept to time. I've totally failed this morning. It's my one duty. So can I just urge speakers and delegates, because this is a very participative event, I'd like to get as many delegates as possible, give them the opportunity to speak. So hopefully this afternoon and in the forthcoming plenaries we'll have that chance. I'm now going to hand over, if I can, to Joanne Kendall, who's just going to tell you where to go next and what the procedures are. Thank you very much.